This research investigates the European Union's maritime surveillance practices in the Mediterranean Sea and how it externalizes border management through agreements with countries in the Middle East and North Africa, specifically Egypt, Libya, and Lebanon. It also examines how these agreements reflect both neocolonial and neoliberal approaches as they prioritize security over humanitarian needs. One of the key concepts in the research is a term borderveillance, and this refers to advanced surveillance technologies, including drones and satellites, and how they are used to monitor and really control migration from the Mediterranean. These strategies enhance border control for the EU, but they raise very significant human rights concerns because they emphasize security over humanitarian obligations. One stark example is the sinking of the Adriana. It was a fishing vessel that had more than 750 migrants or asylum seekers aboard, and it sunk off the coast of Greece on the 14th of June in 2023, and 600 people perished in its sinking, including an estimated, more than 100 women and children. There were no children or female survivors. And what is the most shocking of this event, this catastrophe, it was entirely preventable. The Greek Coast Guard was present when the boat sank. There were also 2 tankers nearby that could have rescued passengers, but no action was taken to move anyone off the Adriana. And this really underscores this broader trend of neglecting human rights and humanitarianism with catastrophically devastating consequences. And unfortunately, the Adriana is not a singular example. There's loss of life and drownings on a regular occurrence in the Mediterranean as the EU fails to engage sufficiently in search and rescue. In Libya, it is as I've stated. Much of the funding has gone toward help construct detention centers, and there has been both funding and training by the EU of the Libyan Coast Guard, even though these detention centers and the Coast Guard have been implicated in very severe human rights violations. In Lebanon, the funding is similar. Not the funding is similar in terms of the amount of funding, but the repercussions of the agreements again prioritize security measures that fail to address the root causes of migration and have no ability to rectify political or economic instability in the country. And in Egypt, the funds have really reinforced very strong state control, thus stifling efforts towards social and political reforms, rather than attempting to institute more democratic processes. I would say the main finding is that these agreements are essentially transactional in nature, in that the EU provides financial and technical support to MENA governments, and in exchange, they receive cooperation for intercepting migrants at sea and means of retaining them on shore, if you will. These policies, this external border management policies, are relatively effective for border control. The approach, as I've stated, undermines democracy, it violates human rights, and it contradicts the aspirations of the Arab Spring. Migration flows to the European Union really surged after the Arab Spring, and they spiked in 2015. And so in response, the EU began to invest in increased surveillance technologies, deploying drones. They installed CCTV at ports, and they bolstered, if you will, national Coast Guard units. They also employed NATO and Frontex to engage in assisting the return of migrants to either ports of departure or ports of origin. And these policies have fundamentally contradicted the momentum of the Arab Spring because they propped up regimes that suppressed dissent. Instead of supporting democratic movements, the EU has prioritized security, stifling progress towards any type of democratic reforms in these countries. I think that unless the EU adopts more balanced and humanitarian approaches, it risks perpetuating evolving cycles of instability in the region, and that will in turn mean more migrants. Policies should focus instead on collaborative efforts that prioritize human rights, democratic values, and sustainable development. I think additionally, the EU needs to invest more in climate change and creating climate resiliency in the MENA regions. The region is poised to have exacerbated high temperatures and increased water scarcity, which will in turn drive more migration in the region. So without really addressing these root causes, displacement and instability will only remain.